Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to another day of biology. Today, we have a pretty full day of notes, so we're going to get going with this right away. We're going to talk about some things that you guys probably learned from the video that you guys watched last week. So, about Darwin and a little bit about Wallace. And we're just going to be talking about the evidence of evolution. So, some things that Darwin and Wallace might have known of, and some of those things that they might not have known of at all. But these are things that we can show or things that we can prove to help prove the idea of evolution. Okay. So, first thing, artificial selection. Artificial selection is something we see pretty often. So, this is the process of allowing only organisms with desirable traits to produce in order to increase the number of individuals with those traits. So, the idea here is something like dogs. We can all agree that dogs come from a common descent. Now, no offense to anybody that might have like a Yorkie Poo or a Shih Tzu or anything like that, those naturally did not just come around. There is no benefit, like natural selection wise or evolutionary wise, for them to be that small and yippy and whatever else. Okay, besides the point. But with that being said, we have been able to artificially select these traits, so then we're able to change the species, or change not the species, but change the breed of dog over time. Okay, so that's why we have all these different dog breeds and why they look so different, because we chose different traits and we're able to manipulate those traits enough to then only breed for desired traits that we wanted. Human directed selection. Okay, human directed evolution. Now, you might also see this in some of the fruits that we eat, or not fruits, but some of the vegetables, and I guess some of the fruits as well. But a lot of these common known vegetables, so like broccoli, cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, and cauliflower, they all actually came from wild mustard. And through artificial selection, we were able to actually turn that wild mustard plant into these five other types of vegetables that we eat today. Okay, so artificial selection was something that was known. When Darwin and Wallace were around, they knew what dogs were and they could see that breeding process happening. So this is something they had kind of an idea of, as they were going into the exploration and as they were looking at the natural selection and starting to get into the theory of evolution. Another one, what they talked about in the videos, they talked a lot about fossil evidence. So I know Charles Darwin for a fact gathered fossils everywhere he was going. Fossil evidence shows species that no longer exist, and we can't find exact fossils of many today's species, so there had to been some type of change. So when you find fossils in the ground, you're not finding like a white-tailed deer. You're finding a different animal that might resemble a white-tailed deer, but it's not exactly the same. Or when they find fossils, say like a dinosaur, like a T-Rex, or anything of that sort, we don't have those animals anymore here, but they were here at one point. So why is there that change? Okay, it's another proof of showing the theory of evolution. Now, there is something called index fossils, and these fossils are used to identify geological periods. So, the shorter lifespan of a species, the more precisely sediments can be dated. So, rapid evolving fossils are used the most. But really, what it's saying here is like, depending on where that fossil was found or what that fossil is, we're able to kind of tell what time period that came from and start making predictions about what was happening in that time period, maybe what it looked like, how they died, where they were living, what might have been there originally to them. So it just gives us more of a broader spectrum or a broader idea of what was actually happening at that time period. Now, there's also a thing called transition fossils, and these kind of fill in some of the gaps and some of the breaks that people had when it came to the theory of evolution. So, this is a document that evolutionary chain from one species to another. So, this is kind of like the in between stage. There is a lot of really cool examples of transition fossils, maybe of, say, a reptile that now has wings, and there might be this transition phase where they had wings, but they probably weren't able to fly, and now we kind of see that in between phase. So a lot of people struggle with the idea of evolution or the theory of evolution because if we think like, oh, it was this thing and then it became this thing, and it just was like boom, boom, and that's not the case. There was so much transition period between there, and these transition fossils kind of allow us to see that transition period, so we understand like it didn't just go to here, but it went from here to 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 here, and finally actually met up with each other. Okay, so I was able to give that process. Now, we're going to kind of get more on the genetic side of this and kind of relate some of those things we've already been talking about to the genetics pieces. So, one of the other things is that things have common genes, or living animals have common genes. This is something that Darwin and Wallace didn't really know much about or anything of is at that time genetic studies really weren't there. But they could observe that organisms have kind of the same body plan. So like everything is a head and like appendages and things of that sort. So it was kind of hinted towards, but they didn't know exactly what it meant genetically. So common genes. Organisms have the same set of genes to create their body parts and their patterning. So different body parts, different patterning. We have differences, but we are like very similar. This gets us into the idea of common genes. You guys are actually going to learn more about this tomorrow, so I'm not going to get too much detail about it. But there is common genes. Next one, number 5, is a thing called embryology. So this is similar patterns of embryo development provided evidence that organisms have descended from a common ancestor. So if you look at this image here, we have fish, reptile, bird, human, and to most of us, this does not resemble any of those things and just kind of looks like some little alien creatures, which I agree with, it totally does. But they look kind of similar, and we're going to actually deal with this right now. Okay, so in class, we're going to do an embryology activity. You guys have that Jamboard that is given to you. Make sure you guys look at that. Now, what you guys are going to do, since you guys don't have this Jamboard and you guys don't actually have this, if you're watching this Edpuzzle right now, I'm just going to talk about these 2 next slides. Okay, and then you're going to answer these on your own. So slide number 1. We have 6 structures here. These are 6 different animals. Is it easy to tell the difference between these? If yes, explain why. If no, explain why not. And now we have what they actually end up becoming. Okay, so these are like real life photos. So this is a fish, embryo fish, salamander, embryo salamander, tortoise, chick, rabbit, human, and these are their embryo stages. As you guys can see, like their embryos are really, really similar, but their adult stages are very different. So as they develop, they become different. So we have most undeveloped and then most developed. We start seeing these noticeable differences and actually start seeing these changes. Okay, that is the idea of embryology. Now, there's another thing called vestigial structures, and this is an anatomical feature that no longer seems to have a purpose in the current form of an organism of the given species. Okay, but it did hold an important role in ancestors. So, in a whale, they have hip bones, but they don't have legs. So that structure is not needed, but it kind of builds that gap or bridges that gap between, hey, maybe these whales, which are mammals and actually can breathe oxygen, maybe have been on land at one point, and maybe they actually had 4 legs. These vestigial structures show this. Now, for humans, we have an appendix. Realistically, we don't need an appendix. I don't have mine anymore. It causes way more harm than it actually does benefit you. But in our ancestor times, they probably needed an appendix depending on what their diet was. Unlike our diet, where we don't need it anymore. Okay, so vestigial structures. The next one is homologous structures. And you guys remember we used the prefix homo, like when we talked about homozygous and heterozygous. Homo means same. So these are same structures. So these structures are similar in different species with a common ancestor. It helps determine how recent a species shared a common ancestor. So we look at here, we have different wings, but they're very similar in bone structure. Okay, so we have like the ulna and the radius, which I believe that's what this is. Oh, yeah, it actually gives me here. Okay, we have the radius and the ulna, which are blue. Then we have the humerus, which is red, and this has a humerus. They all have a humerus. They all have finger bones. Okay, and they all actually have a little thumb bone as well. So they all have the same exact bone structures, proving that they have the same common ancestor. These are homologous structures. Homo meaning same ancestor. Now, you can also look at this with mammals. So we have a human arm with a human hand. We have, this is a cat. Okay, so we have a cat arm. We have a whale flipper, and then we have a bat arm. What you're able to realize here is that these structures are really, really similar. They might be in different sizes, different shapes, but they're all in the same order. So we have humerus, we have ulna on our radius and our ulna, I apologize. We have our metacarpals and we have our carpals. And guess what? They all have these same things and these same structures. And that is not probably a coincidence. This is showing that we do probably share a very common ancestor to one another, hence why we have these same structures. Okay. Now, this is the last one. This is something called an analogous structure, and this is a little bit different. An analogous structure is various structures in different species having the same function but have evolved separately. Thus, they do not share a common ancestor. So think of something like I think this is supposed to be a cicada, but we can even say it's a honeybee and something like a bald eagle. They both have wings. Awesome. But their wings are not there because of their common ancestor. They're there because they had the same pressure, they had the same selective pressure, and they both needed to be able to fly, but they're not there because they both came from a similar animal. One's an insect and one's not. So they do not share a common ancestor, but they both have wings. This is an analogous structure. So that is all we have. We went over a bunch of different things, all the way from analogous structures, homologous structures, vestigial structures, all those different pieces. Now, Darwin knew about some of these things. Oh, Darwin had an idea about artificial selection. Correct. And so did Wallace. Fossil evidence, so did Darwin and Wallace. Transition fossils, that was a little iffy. They were still in between those. Common genes, they probably didn't have a huge idea about. Embryology, Darwin actually did study embryos and did start noticing these two things. So he knew about embryology. Do that. Vestigial structures, homologous structures, and analogous structures, those are all the things that they were able to notice and able to look at as well. Okay. Were they able to break down the genetics of it all? Absolutely not. But these things help them lead to the theory of evolution. These things have also helped people today that are still studying the theory of evolution. And most importantly, the genetic side is what the new theory of evolution is really pushing towards, because those are things that we weren't able to observe and notice before without the information that we have now, without the technology we have now. That's all I have for you guys today. If you guys have any questions or concerns or issues, please reach out to your teachers. Other than that, have a great day. I'll talk to you guys later.